Before we start talking about some of the ways in which you can transform the image, I do want to just touch base on the properties panel again. So the properties panel, again, depending on the tool that you're using and what you are working with, you can see that you have different options here. So while you have some of these options in these panels here, or in a dialog box, this might be a good place for you to always look for what your settings are or what your options are. So just want to kind of remind you that the properties panel is generally kind of where you have some additional features, or it's another place where you can find some of the other customizations that you might want to do to a tool or to a task. So that's the properties panel. The other thing that I want to show you is you may actually click on something. So for example, I'm going to double click on this and you can see that it grays out everything. This is actually called an isolation mode, and this can be really helpful if you only want to focus on making a change to this one thing and you don't want to change anything else that's around it. You can do a couple things. You can use all the tools like you would have done otherwise, but we can see that we have this bar up here. And it shows that in this sort of B scene, which is my layer panel, or in my layers panel, it would have been a layer or sub layer called B2. So this one would have been at the B2. I can come in here and I can work on different things here as I'm kind of doing this, and this helps me to really sort of isolate. So I see how I can't get to these other things unless I double click just like I did there, where it takes us out of the isolation mode. I can also, so I can obviously double click on this to activate this. I find it easier just to click off, but you can certainly use the arrows. Sometimes there are different depths. So if you're going into like, think of it like a root folder where you have several embedded or nested things, you might actually have more than one of these arrows in order to get out. In this instance, I'm just clicking on the one thing on the surface here and it's created an isolation mode. Like I said, it's really helpful and useful if you really just want to focus on one single thing and not be distracted, or maybe you don't want to grab things that are outside of what you're working with. So this is why, or when you might actually want to use the isolation mode. Again, to close this, I'm just going to double click and you can see it automatically closes out. All right, so you might find yourself in that. If you see sort of your screen sort of got to go to white or a lower transparency of that, this would be what you are experiencing as the isolation mode, and all you have to do is double click on the artboard in order to close it, or click on that arrow. All right, let's also look at one additional thing in our layers panel before we move to the transform tools. So I want to show you it's a hidden, it's not something that's easily known, but if you've used Illustrator for a long time, you can actually do something in here. So say that you're working on this. I'm just actually going to toggle on some of these sub groups here. And say that I go ahead and I just turn off, I'm just going to turn off a bunch of things here. Okay, it doesn't really matter what I'm turning off. So I'm working up in here. I don't have these open anymore. Okay, and I see I'm missing something. A short key command in order to toggle all of the closed or hidden panels is to do Option Command 3. And as soon as I do that, it opens and turns on all of those layers here. So I just wanted to show you that. That was an additional thing that I thought would be useful to you as you're working, is it's Option Command 3. It opens up any of the hidden layers, or when I say hidden, I mean that they are turned off. Okay, with that being said, let's start talking about other ways in which we can transform our imagery that we have here. So I have this scene here with 3 little bees, and so what I want to do is I want to work with these bees here. And I actually haven't done anything with this other than just have 3 different bees. So we're going to use different tools. So this first one, I'm just going to grab this one. This is B2. And if we look at our toolbar here, we're going to first look at our scale. So if you press the S key, it will turn on our scale tool. Now you can see that we have this little arrow down here. So if we click and hold, you can see that we have some other tools in here, but if we press the S key, the scale tool comes up. I'm going to zoom in just so that we can see this a bit better, because you can see that all the points in here. When the scale tool comes up, we have a point that shows up here, and this point is the point in which whatever we end up doing is going to be using that as a guide, okay? So for example, if before I click on anything else, if I just change that, so I'm going to take this, I'm not actually clicking on anything, and I'm just going to click somewhere else, you can see that I just moved that point. Now, when I come into this area, you can see that if I click and hold, I can start to stretch and manipulate, but it's all based on this point right here. So you see that even if I were to rotate it or move it around, it's based on this particular point here. So that's why you want to have that point. I'm actually going to undo this so I don't manipulate my B. The next thing that you can do, say that you want to use this point, but you also want to open the dialog box. One way that you can do that is if you click or hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click on, so it will create the point, but also open the dialog box. So I'm going to do this, and you can see that it automatically opens the dialog box. Now, I can use any of these features here in order to either uniformly, meaning that the entire thing I can reduce down to 90%, or I can change it where I can do it ununiformly, where I change the horizontal and the vertical to different proportions. So for the sake of this, all I'm going to do here, and really just so that we can see it a bit better, I'm going to change this to 50%. Okay, I'm going to do 50%. And instead of pressing OK, if I just press the Tab key, anytime I press the Tab key, it will show you or essentially sort of enter without closing the dialog box. I'm actually going to undo that because I don't want that, so I'm going to press Cancel. And I'm going to do this again where I hold down the Option key. I'm going to click like this. If you don't want to click like this, remember you can always just double click on the tool and the dialog box comes up. All right, so I'm going to again change this to 50%, and this time I'm going to press Copy instead of pressing OK. And you can see that when it made a copy, okay, so here's the copy it's selected. If I just go to my Move tool, I can move this like this. I can move it somewhere else, and then once I do that, I can then do Command D, and when I do D, it's going to duplicate it, or it should duplicate it. Let's see, where did I make my mistake here? So you can see that sometimes we make mistakes as we're doing this. So I'm just going to make sure I have this selected. I'm going to go to my scale tool. I'm going to hold down the Option and then click so I can move that point down here like this. Oh, this was just the scale. So it just changed the scale. It actually didn't move it when we were doing this. So I'm going to do 50% here. And then I'm going to do a copy. And then as I do my copy here, I'm going to go to my Move, and then I can just make it a percentage of that. Okay, so that would be the scale tool. Okay, so I'm doing the scale tool. That would be one way to do this. Another way that you could actually scale this is so like right now I really wanted to do 50%, which is why I use this tool instead of using one of the points, the boundary box, which you have to hold down Shift in order to change the scale like this, so you can still do that. Another thing that you can do is, and actually I'm going to hold off on that because I'm going to undo this real quick to make it large again, and I'll just go back a couple of times. And one of the things I want to show you, when you don't know how far back and you don't want to go too far back, there's actually a cool feature in Illustrator that's called the History panel. And I don't currently have it open, so I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to scroll to the History panel. And then here you can see that in the History panel, it shows the last things that I just did. So when I moved it, I'm just going to go back all the way up to scale. And then I want to make sure that I haven't changed anything. So I'm just kind of adjusting this so that it's back into position. So you see, this was the original position. You can slide this in over here somewhere. Let's go ahead and just do that to make it easier like this so that we never have to go back up into our Windows panel to find this. All right, now let's talk about the tool that's just to the left of this. So if I click on this, you can see that I have both rotate and reflect. So again, I can do the same thing here where I can change where the point is, and then when I do this, it's going to rotate it based on this point. So it's going to pivot it, okay? Another thing that you can do without using the rotate tool is if you're in the selection tool, okay, and it doesn't need to pivot along a point. If you come up to the edge of the boundary box, you see that we have this arrow here, and this arrow here tells you if you hold down the shift key, you can change the proportions. But if you just kind of move a little bit on the outside of this corner, do you see how it changes into a rounded double arrow? This tells me that it's now activated where I can now rotate it, and it will rotate it by default from the center access point. So that would be another way that you could do this without actually getting into the rotate tool. All right. The next thing that we can look at is we can look at the reflect tool, which is nested in the rotate. So I'm going to click on rotate, which is R. Reflect is actually the letter O, so I can use O to do this. And really what reflect is doing is that it's going to flip it around, whether it's going to be vertical or horizontal. So you can see that I just flipped this. If I wanted to do this, I can also flip it where I change its orientation. So depending on how you're doing this, and every time you click, it can see that it changes its orientation. I'm changing the point. So you see how that point was just changed? Let's go back to that so that we can see this. So again, I can click on this to move the point, and then when I move on this, it will not only reflect it, but it's also kind of moving it to where I want it. All right, I'm going to undo that. Remember, you can always either double click. So I'm going to double click on this, and we can get the dialog box that allows you to use maybe a particular angle if you have something in mind, or you can ask it just to reflect it, whether it's horizontal or vertical. You can also do a copy, which is also a really neat feature in here that it makes it easier and useful for us to work. All right, I'm going to press cancel so that we get sort of to our back one here. And the next tool I want to show you is embedded into the scale tool, and it's called the shear tool. Now, the shear tool, it functions very much like the other ones we've just looked at. It has a center point. So depending on where my center point is, and I'm going to move down here, when I do this, it's going to morph the object that I have selected to make it look like it's cropping or shearing it. A lot of times when you use shear, it can be a way in order to make it look like it is in motion. So you see how I'm kind of manipulating this as I'm kind of moving back and forth. This is really helpful if you want something to look like it is moving. So you can see it's very sensitive here. So I might actually suggest I just release the mouse. I'm going to do Command Z. And here what I'm going to do is right where I have this point, I'm just going to do now Option and click again so that my dialog box comes up. And when my dialog box comes up, I can then sort of come in and slowly sort of rotate this so that I can kind of see what I am working with here. And then I can always make a copy of it. So if I want to make a copy instead of it being the same, so that I maybe can see an option here. What does it look like? Am I happy with that in replacement of this? Okay. So that's the shear tool. I'm going to just get rid of that because I don't need that. Okay. And now I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And now what I want to do is if I come in here and I do, let's go ahead and select all three of these little bees here. And I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can see more of the scene. Now, there's another way in which we can actually work in transforming this, and this is actually up in the top toolbar here. So if you go to Object and you go to Transform, you can see that it has the Move, the Rotate, Reflect, Scale, and Shear, which essentially does the same thing that is in those tools, but it also gives us a Transform Again, and it also gives us Transform Each. Now, they do something slightly different if I were to make a adjustment. So let's say I make an adjustment. I have all these three. Let's go ahead and just group them just so that we can get them all together. And then let's go in and let's see, let's make some sort of change to it. Let's go ahead and rotate them. So I'm going to, again, you see how it has that little blue? So if I go on here closer like this, I can change the pivot point. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click down here. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this like this. And when I do that, you see how it just kind of moved it like this? I can now press Command D, and you can see that I am continuing to rotate it around this here. But it's not giving me a duplicate, so I'm actually going to so I'm doing Command Z. If I come back up to Options here and I go to Transform again, whoops, excuse me, Transform, sorry, I should be doing Each here, where I can then move it, okay? I can move it and change the scale. So let's go ahead and look at what this might look like. So if I'm going to change the scale, let's change this to 60% here, and I'm going to do 60% here as well. You can always toggle this on and off. Right now it means that it's not linked, okay? So linked means it's the same here, so it's 60%. I can also rotate it horizontally or vertically, okay? So something like this. And instead of actually just pressing OK, I can press copy. And when I do copy, you can see that I get another copy of this. And then once I've done that, I can continue doing Command D. And Command D will add these extra copies in here. And you can see that it's continuing to make it smaller. So remember how I had it under the 60%. It's making it smaller as I am clicking on the transform again, okay? It didn't move it the way that I wanted it to, but you can see that it's a great way to duplicate this, okay? All right, one additional thing as we're talking about this transform again, let me show you one other thing that's not actually in that menu before I show you the transform each again, okay? So say that I have these three B's, okay, and I'm going to make a copy. Instead of using Command C and Command V, an easy way in Illustrator to do that is if you have this selected, and now I'm going to hold down the Option key. When I have the Option key and I'm over an object, so not in the center of this group, but I'm actually over an object like this, you can see that my cursor turns into two arrows. When the two arrows are coming up, it means that I can duplicate this. So I'm going to duplicate, I'm holding down the Option key. I'm going to click and then move this to see how I'm making this as a second one here. Once I do this, I have to keep holding the Option key. For some reason, I don't know if I get too excited, but I often lift the Option key before actually releasing the mouse. So you have to release the mouse and then release the Option key. Once you have this in place exactly the way that you want, you can now do Command D and it will duplicate in the same sort of movement. So you see how I went down to the bottom right? It will continue doing that based on its location and placement. So this can be a good way to duplicate or what's called transform again, okay? Which is also, it's still in the objects here. It's the first one up here, okay? So transform again. All right, I'm going to go ahead and remove those and get back to the initial three little B's here. And let's look at some of the other options that are in the Transform Each dialog box, okay? So I have 60% here. I have this movement here. You can also, let me turn that off. Let me cancel that real quick. Let's do this again. I'm going to go to Options, Transform, and then Transform Each. Okay, so I had it on random here, but we could do it where we want it to, so I'm going to zoom in. It's not letting me zoom in, so let me cancel this real quick so I can get a little closer. Because these B's are so detailed, they have lots of points here. So let's see if I can make this show up a little easier here. So let's go ahead and click on that. I'm going to zoom out just the tiniest bit here. So I'm going to press the Z, and then I'm going to move out instead of using there. There we go. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to the object, go to transform each, and I had it, the last time I used it, I had on random. So I'm turning the random off here. And what I can do is I can, so it's 60%, I can change the orientation of this by doing the reflect X right here. And when I do that, I can then make a copy. But before I do that, this is the only way. So unlike the other tools where you could set the point, in the transform each, you only have the ability of these 9 placements here. So right now it's basing on the center, but say that I pick the bottom right corner. If I click on that, you can see that it moved it. And I do the reflect Y, I'm going to press a copy here. And when I copy it, do you see that not only do I get my original, but now I get the copy based on what I wanted it, right? So I wanted it to be 60% smaller, and I wanted it to move, right? So the measurements of movement, and then I did a copy so that it's here, okay? So I can, again, do this again where I go to, and this one's actually kind of, if you look at the short key cut, it is Shift Option Command D. So it's a lot if you're not used to that. So I can say, okay, I don't want it to reflect X. Let's say I'm going to go ahead and have it reflect Y. Do the same sort of thing here. And now, again, I'm going to, let's move this up to the top corner here. Once I've done that, I'm going to press copy. And again, it gives me a copy. So it continues to make it smaller and it's kind of moving it around. Okay. I can also, when I have something selected, so let's say I have that selected, I'll do the same thing again, Shift Option Command D. So the dialog box comes up, and let's go ahead and do random like this, and you can see that it randomized kind of where it's at. Let's go ahead and just do it in the center here, and when it does the random, it's doing random, you'll see in just a moment about where like some of the parameters, whether how much it's rotated or reflected, etc. Okay, so I'm going to press copy just so I can see a version of this, and you can see that this new one that came in, you see that not only was it reflected, it also spent around a little bit here too. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you just in this, so I'm just going to click off of this for just a moment, and just so that we can see it in a very sort of simplistic way, let's go ahead and make just a rectangle in the scene here. Okay, I'm going to do a rectangle here. I'm just going to double click on the fill, and I'm just going to select a solid color because it doesn't need to be anything special here. So I'm going to do, whoops, why didn't it do that? All right, solid color here like this. And then I'm going to change the stroke to a black like this. And I'm going to just come in a little closer here like this. If I change this stroke up here to, let's go to, that's pretty big. Let's go to 5 points. Okay, with the 5 points in here, I'm just going to go ahead and use this little point here. I'm going to move it in a little bit so it makes it a curved, cornered rectangle. Okay, so I have this object here. I'm going to do the same thing where I go to Object, Transform, and Transform Each. If I don't have scale, strokes, and effects, and scale corners, so I'm going to do this for just a second, you can see that, let's go ahead and just, let's see, let's do, I don't want to do any of that. Let's see, let's go to 0, like that. And then we've changed the scale of this, so we've made it smaller. So you see how it's making it smaller. If I don't change the scale of the effects and the strokes, it will, so I'm just going to press copy so we can see this. Actually, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to turn off the random so we can see what we're doing here. All right, so let's see, let's get this back sort of, we can see what we're looking at here. All right, let's kind of get it back into our picture plane here. And then let's go ahead and change, I think that 0 probably is the best here, like that. Okay, so if I go ahead and do something like this, as I make it much smaller, so again, if you're changing sort of you see how this is moving it away from the point here? Okay, so make sure the point is there. All right. So let's just do 10% or 10 pixels here. I'll go ahead and do the same here so that it's much closer to our object. So unlike it looking like a rectangle that has smooth and rounded corners and edges, it will look something like this where it kind of looks like a pill. So when you want it to maintain the characteristics of the rounded corners of this rectangle, you're going to click on Scale Corners. See how that brings that back to a rectangle? And then it can also do the same thing. So if I have Scaled Strokes and Effects, this will change the scale of the stroke based on how big this shape is. So if I'm making it 20% of its current thing, you can see that when I click on this to activate this, the center part is going to be, it's going to make it much larger and the stroke is going to get much smaller. So do you see how that proportionally, so if I'm just going to press copy, now you can see that I have two objects that are the same proportions. I just changed the scale to 20%. So now the stroke and the center has the same weight of the center here and the stroke. So those are some other things in that dialog box that you want to keep in mind. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is, I think for what we're going to do next is, let's go ahead and grab the bees again. And what I'm going to do in the bees is I'm going to ungroup. Do you remember what ungroup is? It's Shift Command G. Okay, so I've just ungrouped the bees so that I can separate out each individual bees here. Okay, do you see that? All right, let's grab this bigger bee here, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little closer. Because this next transform tool doesn't have a short key command, but it can be super useful when you need to make small tweaks without having to redraw something. So this is not about changing something drastically. This is about making small tweaks to make this work. All right, so if I go back to the scale, I'm sorry, not scale. If I go to the, I haven't showed you free transform. Sorry about that. So if you hit free transform, which is the E key, and actually let's go ahead and do that. That's still the same sort of thing. Again, it makes the center point here. So you see the center point is here. I again can move this around. So you see how I have to click and pull it instead of just clicking like I did with the other ones. I have to move this around, and I can move it anywhere that I want. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it in the center for now. When you click on this tool, unlike some of the other tools where we pulled out the tray, this one pulls out a menu, and this menu is called a hub, okay? So the first icon here is whether you want it to be linked, not linked, automatic or not. So I'm gonna not do this. I don't want it to be linked. This first, or the second one that I can transform is truly a free transform. So I can see how it changes its symbol here. I can change the scale, but it changes it proportionally because everything is connected. Well, hang on. When I hold down the Option key, it allows me to then sort of manipulate some of this. So you see how it changed the tool here as I'm kind of increasing this. It allows me to make adjustments like this. You don't even actually have to hold down the Option key in order to make this happen. You can actually lock this, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's go look at the next one here. If we click on this next one here, this one is going to be the perspective. So meaning that when I click on one of these corners in the boundary box, it will adjust it based on the perspective, and it won't adjust everything, making it smaller, okay? So I can either kind of move this to make this so it looks like it's getting smaller as it goes back in space, or here, sort of the side of a box, okay? So I'm going to undo this, okay? And then the last one here is truly where you get to click on the individual dots of the boundary box, and it will allow you to manipulate these independently. But when it does that, it changes and morphs the other parts of this graphic, okay? So I can take these individual points and sort of move these things around. So if you know perspective, for example, that might be something that you might want to do instead of utilizing maybe the perspective scale tool or free transform tool. This is one way to do that, okay? All right, and then once you're done, all I have to do is select any other tool in order to have that happen. I'm going to again press Command Z. Okay, and because I did it several times, do you see how I morphed it several times? Let's go back to our history panel here so that we can go back into here and make some adjustments. So I'm going to go to, instead of adding the default handles, I'm just going to go to free transform tool so that it gets back to its original scale here, okay? All right, so now that I have the speed back in here, now I want to show you what's called the puppet warp. So you're going to go back to your free transform tool, which is just below your shear tool and your scale tool. Okay, so free transform, the letter E, and we're going to go to puppet warp tool. It doesn't have a short key command, so you're going to go into free transform and then click on this. Okay, the way this works, I'm going to zoom in. Generally, I would say by default, this is something it would look like. It would have a mesh. The mesh that goes on top of here is how you can, it's a calculation that manipulates, and you can see all of the ways in which it's developing this. So you can see that based on the shapes here, we have some larger triangles and then some smaller ones here. So the computer is working through and doing this calculation. You can also adjust and expand this mesh to make it smaller, and when you make it smaller, you can see that it makes this adjustment here. I personally prefer to turn the mesh off for the most part. I would say most of the time I have the mesh off. Okay, so just FYI, I have the mesh off. So I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to say turn off the mesh, or where it has the show mesh, I'm just going to deselect it. Now you can see that I have these dots. And these dots will allow me to make some movement or some changes. But before I do that, and you can see that it automatically gave me what it thinks it is. So it's kind of giving me a suggestion here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the dots here. And just for the sake of this, when I activated it, it has a white dot. I'm going to press the delete key here. And I'm just for the sake of this, I'm going to select each of these and I'm going to delete them. Because our B here is so small, I am going to, because I don't want to make huge changes, I'm just clicking on the dots here, okay? And now that I don't have any points here, I'm going to now add some points. So the way that the puppet warp works is that essentially you're shifting or moving parts of this a little bit. So let's just, for the sake of this, let's go ahead and just put a point here on the nose, and then we'll put a point on the neck, something like this. And then without touching anything, we're going to come back to this point here. I'm going to click and I'm going to move. So you see I can move, but when I move, you see how everything else is moving with it. So it's really intended, so I just did Command Z, it's really intended to use and make small adjustments. What I find is that when you have a point like this, the parameter in which it's adjusting, so if I click on this, for example, you can see the area of influence is here, but it's also actually much greater than that. And actually this circle here will allow us to twist this. So you see how the cursor turns to a sort of circular arrow? What this means is if I click on this and I rotate, it literally will rotate along the edge here, something like that. You might find a need for it. I don't use this tool. I can't even tell you the last time I used it. I use the puppet warp, I just don't use the rotate within these points. Okay, so now that I have this point here, I'm going to actually put another point along the feet here, and then this will prevent this from moving a little bit. And actually, I'm going to undo that. So I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to put the point in the back here. That way this area of influence doesn't go over the bottom of the face here. Now I'm going to come up to this point here, and you see how this allows me to move, and I'm moving it actually quite a distance. When I did this before, the entire B shifted. But because I have this point here, it almost sort of locks it down. It doesn't totally lock it down, but it locks it down some. So this will allow me to make some minor adjustments without having to redraw something. So I'm going to click on this. I made 2 points up here on these antennae, and you can see that I can actually move the antenna or each individual antennas to a separate location, okay? So these would be for small, subtle changes. And then again, to get out of this, all I have to do is click on another tool. And when I click off on this, you can see that it made some subtle changes, which makes it a bit more unique than the first original one, okay? So I didn't actually duplicate this when we looked at this, but this is a good way, again, instead of having to redraw something entirely, you can use the puppet warp in order to move things. So if you have a character and you want to move the head a little bit, tilt the head a little bit to the left or to the right, you would put a point on the neck, maybe even on the shoulders of the body to lock in the body, and then tilt the head. So this is a good way to make some small, subtle adjustments.